I grew up in the shadow of my sister, always hearing the subtle digs, sometimes from family friends, but most often from my own parents. "Look at your sister. She's accomplished, graceful, everything we hoped for," they'd say, smiling at her while I sat invisible at the edge of the table. No matter what I did, I was always measured against her. And when I didn't fit their mold, their disappointment hung heavy in the air, like a fog that never lifted. The breaking point came one evening over dinner. My parents were in one of their usual moods, reminiscing about my sister's achievements. My mother set down her glass and sighed. "Honestly, sometimes I think you're only half the woman your sister is." My father nodded in agreement, and the words landed like a blade. I remember gripping my fork tighter, the metal biting into my palm as I forced myself to stay calm. I wanted to cry. I wanted to scream. But instead, I smiled. Because deep inside, I carried a truth they didn't know, a truth I had quietly built brick by brick, paycheck by paycheck, while they underestimated me. So I leaned back in my chair and said softly, "You know, it's funny. You've never really asked about my work, or what I've been doing these past few years." Their eyes flicked toward me, disinterested at first. Then I added, "I've saved $84,000, on my own, no help, no shortcuts, just me." The room went still. My sister's fork clinked against her plate, and my dad blinked as if he hadn't heard me right. My mother's lips parted, but no words came. In that silence, I felt something shift, not just in the air, but in me. For once, I wasn't the shadow. I wasn't half of anyone. I was whole. That night wasn't about the money. It was about proving to myself, and to them, that I was more than their narrow definition of success. And here's the lesson I walked away with. Your worth is not defined by comparison, but by the courage to keep building when no one is clapping for you. So if you've ever been told you're less than, I want you to hear me. You are not half of anyone. You are a story still unfolding, a strength still rising. And one day, you'll have your own 84K moment. A moment where the world has no choice but to see you. I grew up in the shadow of my sister, always hearing the subtle digs, sometimes from family friends, but most often from my own parents. They didn't even realize how sharp their words were, or maybe they did and just thought I was strong enough to take it. "Look at your sister. She's accomplished, graceful, everything we hoped for," they would say, as if she were the standard everyone should strive to meet. I'd sit there quietly, smiling weakly, pretending those words didn't cut. But inside, I felt small, like a faded sketch standing next to a masterpiece. Even when I achieved something, it was brushed aside, as though my victories weren't victories at all, just little accidents that happened to me by chance. When I graduated, my mom commented on how my sister's gown had fit her better at her ceremony. When I got my first job, my dad reminded me that it wasn't as impressive as my sister's career path. It was endless, this cycle of comparisons, this unspoken rule that my best would never be enough. I remember birthdays where she got praised for simply walking into the room while my gifts, whether tangible or efforts from the heart, were acknowledged with a passing nod. Family friends were always told of her promotions, her travels, her accolades. My name never made it into the conversation unless it was attached to some reminder that I should work harder, carry myself better, or be more like her. It was as if I didn't exist outside of being the benchmark for what not to do. Over time, I learned to build a kind of quiet resilience. I stopped expecting recognition and started creating my own sense of worth in silence. But still, every word, every comparison, every sigh of disappointment etched itself into me. It's strange how even as an adult, you can sit at a table with your parents and still feel like a child desperate for their approval. And no matter how hard you try to ignore it, it stings. It lingers. It makes you wonder if you'll ever be enough in their eyes. Would you like me to keep expanding with even deeper emotional flashbacks? like childhood memories where favoritism was obvious? Or keep it mostly focused on the present-day family tension? The breaking point came one evening over dinner. It wasn't supposed to be anything dramatic. Just a casual family meal, the kind where laughter should have been the centerpiece. My sister sat across from me, glowing as always in their eyes, while I tried to fade into the background, focusing on the pattern of my plate instead of the conversation. They asked her about her latest project, her upcoming trip, even the dress she had bought earlier that week. Every word was dipped in admiration, each compliment served to her like a carefully prepared dish. When the attention shifted toward me, it wasn't out of genuine curiosity. It was to measure, to compare, to remind me once again that I was trailing behind. My mother set down her glass of wine, her smile stretching wider for my sister before dimming as her gaze met mine. "Honestly," she said, her tone wrapped in exasperation, "sometimes I think you're only half the woman your sister is." She said it so casually, as though it were an objective fact, not a blade slicing through the middle of my chest. My father, sitting beside her, didn't even hesitate to nod in agreement. That small, wordless gesture carried more weight than 1,000 spoken sentences. I felt the blood rush to my face. My fork trembled slightly in my hand, and I gripped it tighter until the prongs dug into the meat on my plate. My chest tightened, my throat felt heavy, but I refused to let a single tear fall. They continued, eating, as if they hadn't just dismantled me with a sentence, as if these comments were perfectly normal, something I should accept without protest. In that moment, I felt like a child again, shrinking beneath their expectations, desperate to scream that I wasn't less, that I wasn't broken, that I had built a life they didn't know anything about. But all I did was sit there in silence, smiling faintly, nodding when spoken to, while inside me a storm was raging. I wanted to cry. I wanted to scream. I wanted to stand up from that table, slam my hands down, and tell them how cruel they had been for years, how every comparison had chipped away at me piece by piece, until I almost believed I really was only half of someone else. But instead, I stayed still. I forced my lips into a tight smile, the kind that hides pain but doesn't erase it. I could hear the clinking of cutlery, the hum of conversation drifting from other tables in the restaurant. Yet for me, the entire world had narrowed down to the battle raging inside my chest. I stared at my plate, watching the condensation from my water glass pool into a tiny river that crept across the tablecloth. It felt symbolic somehow. That slow spread, quiet, but unstoppable. That was me, I thought. Small, overlooked but steady, carving my own path while no one paid attention. I reminded myself of the nights I stayed awake balancing budgets, of the early mornings when I chose discipline over ease, of the sacrifices I made that no one in that room had ever noticed. I had built something in silence, something solid, something that couldn't be dismissed with a sigh or a careless insult. So instead of breaking down, I chose to stay composed. I kept my voice locked behind my teeth, knowing that I didn't need to defend myself with anger. My secret was bigger than their words, and I held it close like a flame in the dark. Their opinions had boxed me in for years, but I had been working in that silence, brick by brick, building something they would never expect. And as I sat there, letting their laughter fill the space where my pain echoed, I knew my moment was coming. So I leaned back in my chair and said softly, "You know, it's funny. You've never really asked about my work, or what I've been doing these past few years." My voice was calm, almost casual, but I could feel the electricity buzzing beneath my skin. For the first time that evening, their eyes turned toward me, not with warmth or admiration, but with that same dismissive curiosity they always reserved for me, as if waiting for me to say something unimpressive they could brush aside. I let the silence stretch just a little longer, holding their attention, letting them believe I was about to ramble about something insignificant. Then, without flinching, I said, "I've saved $84,000, on my own. No help, No shortcuts, just me. The effect was immediate. My sister's fork froze halfway to her mouth, a piece of chicken slipping back onto her plate with a dull thud. My father, who rarely showed surprise, blinked rapidly as though he hadn't heard me correctly. And my mother, whose words had so easily cut me moments ago, actually set her napkin down and leaned back, her expression caught between disbelief and confusion. No one spoke at first. The usual noise of the restaurant felt louder against their silence, the clatter of dishes and bursts of laughter from other tables filling in the space where their voices used to be. My sister was the first to break, her tone sharp, almost defensive. 84,000? Doing what? She asked, as though the only possible explanation was some stroke of luck, some unearned windfall. I met her gaze steadily. Working, saving, making choices you didn't see. While you thought I wasn't enough, I was building something quietly. Something that's mine. The words weren't loud, but they carried. For once I didn't feel small under their stares. For once I wasn't the shadow in the room. I was the spark. The room went still. My sister's fork clinked against her plate, and my dad blinked as if he hadn't heard me right. My mother's lips parted, but no words came. It was as though the air had thickened, and I could almost see the weight of my words settling on their shoulders. For once, the silence didn't make me feel invisible. It made me feel powerful. I could sense them trying to process it, their minds racing to rewrite the version of me they had always held on to. My sister shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her usual glow dimmed by the harsh light of reality. My dad cleared his throat as if to respond, but nothing came out, and he reached for his glass instead. My mom, the one who had always been quick with criticism, just stared at me, her expression unreadable, almost fragile. And in that stillness, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't about proving them wrong, or even about the money itself. It was about reclaiming my own narrative, about stepping out of the shadow they had cast over me since childhood. For years I had let their words dictate how I saw myself, less than, weaker, always behind. But here I was, holding a truth they could neither ignore nor belittle. That night wasn't about dollars in a bank account. It was about every late night I spent working when no one believed in me, every sacrifice I made without applause, every quiet choice to keep going when the world told me to stop. The $84,000 was proof, but the real victory was the person I had become through the struggle. And as I sat there, shoulders squared, heart steady, I realized I didn't need their validation anymore. Their approval had once been the thing I craved most, but now, watching their stunned faces, I understood the lesson hidden in all those years of doubt. My worth was never theirs to define.